Don't hit that skip button because I have huge news for you. The Rewind of the Living Dead t shirt lives. It is here. It is available to purchase. Oh, yes, I'm not kidding. We finally got our Rewind of the Living Dead t shirt out, and it's amazing. It is printed by the same company that prints for Cavity Colors and Fright Rags, which, if you're a hardcore horror fan who buys a lot of horror t shirts, I know I do, you know that's the very best and highest quality because we couldn't do anything less for our fans. It's an amazing full color design designed by Jason Ragosta. It's very cool. It features a zombified myself, a zombified Damon, and it looks just like an awesome horror shirt because that's what we want, because we're horror fans too. So we wanted to make a t-shirt that you could really sink your teeth into. Go to rewindofthelivingdead.bigcartel.com. Again, that's rewindofthelivingdead.bigcartel.com to get your t-shirt today. Rewind of the Living Dead is a review show, so spoilers are ahead.
Found footage has become one of the most recognized genres inside the horror industry over the past 20 plus years. But that definitely wasn't the case in the late 90s. It wasn't until a pair of friends and rookie filmmakers who attended college together in Florida came up with an idea for a low-budget movie that surrounded the disappearance of three students searching for the truth and making a documentary about an old urban legend regarding a witch from Maryland. Armed with $60,000, a 35-page outline, and a trio of first-time actors with improvisation skills, and those unknown directors would soon produce one of the most successful and terrifying independent films of all time.
This is my home, which I am leaving the comforts of for the weekend to explore the Blair Witch. I can see you.
I'm really excited about this. Thank you for the
I'm very
opportunity.
glad.
This area's been haunted by that old woman for years.
I don't know why you have to have every conversation on video.
Because we're making a documentary.
Not about us getting lost. We're making a documentary about a witch.
I don't.
We're lost. Admit that first.
No, I know we're not lost.
You're all over the place.
So how do we know it was people?
Well, even if it wasn't, I'm not going to play with that either.
And it's all because of me that we're here now. Hungry and cold and hunted. Just want to apologize to Mike's mom and Josh's mom and my mom.
Tell me where you are, John!
I'm gonna die out here.
In the latest episode of Rewind of the Living Dead, we make sure not to lose the map and never, ever walk into strange houses in the middle of the woods as we look back at the 1999 found footage classic, The Blair Witch Project. Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin.
And I be the Witch of the Woods. I'm Patrick Carroll.
You are not the Witch of the Woods.
This just hit me like a ton of bricks. Could The Witch be the prequel to The Blair Witch? I mean, it takes place in roughly the same region.
That's true. Look at you, A24.
Fuck me.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that, yes, that's the case.
So this movie is over 20 years old at this point, from 1999. So, of course, we're not doing any kind of non-spoilers. This is all spoilers. But, I'm just going to put it out there right now as we talk about this film. The Blair Witch Project, to me, Patrick, is a holy grail film. Like, this is one of because we talk all the time about how we are so desensitized to horror. So when we grade, we do our final category each and every week here on the show. Is it scary? Because ultimately we are a horror movie podcast and we are here to be scared. We grade on a scale because you and I are so, for lack of a better word, fucked up that we don't get scared at the same things that every other horror fan might get scared at. We've seen so much. We watch, even movies like terrify other people. We're like, it was pretty good.
Okay.
The Blair Witch Project in 1999, when I sat in a movie theater and watched this film, and I did go see this in the theater, I was a young kid, I was a teenager, scared the piss out of me.
Yeah.
It scared me. I mean, I've rarely had movies where I've like wanted to hide my eyes, where I'm like doing this in the theater. The Blair Witch Project was one of those.
You know, it's pretty interesting. I've brought up on this podcast before that I'm not really the biggest fan of found footage films. I don't have a problem with them, and some of them I actually like. They're just not my thing. They're not my cup of tea. But that's because they all pale in comparison to the Blair Witch, which was the first found footage movie that I ever saw. And I'm just like you, Damon. I was a teen. I went to the movies. I saw it, and it scared the shit out of me. But there should be some context to this, right? And because it is important, it's generationally, it's a pretty important movie for guys like you and me, or folks like you and me, I should say. And that was, not only was this the first like big found footage movie, because even the filmmakers of the Blair Witch recognize the first found footage movie that everybody knows about is Cannibal Holocaust, but that didn't really make the waves that the Blair Witch made. The Blair Witch came at a very interesting time in pop culture, which is the beginnings, the real beginnings of the internet becoming something that everybody uses. At the time, it's 1999. Very few people had a phone, a cell phone, I should say. There was no smartphones. They didn't exist in 1999. So all of your interneting happened at home on message boards and on crappy websites, because the websites weren't great in 1999. And the filmmakers at the time knew they had something going, because they decided to do basically the first viral campaign. They claimed that what you were seeing was actual found footage. Geez, that's an interesting term. It's a whole genre of horror now. Found footage is a genre based off of this movie, because they said, we found some footage of these college students or whatever they were, these documentarians that were out there looking for a witch, and we cobbled it together, and what we found was horrifying. Well, in the early days of the internet, before everybody got jaded and everybody assumed that everything is fake that they see, people were like, oh my God, this is real. We are seeing right now footage of people who got lost in the woods, and maybe they were killed by a witch. We don't know. Like, that was all the talk, the people around my age range who were talking about this movie at the time. It was like a 50-50 split between people who were like, no, these people really died, and people like me who were a little more skeptical, going, there's no way that's what we're watching. You can't watch that kind of stuff. That's a snuff film. You can't watch snuff films. And so I'm like, it's actually illegal to own or watch a snuff film. So I was like, it's definitely not real. But the campaign behind it, and I at the time went to the website, the Blair Witch website, that was really crappy, like made on like Angel Fire or some shit like that back in the day. And I was like, wow, this is pretty convincing. And in my very, I wish I didn't have time to do a ton of research on this movie, but what I did find of it really hit home for me, and that was the filmmakers. And I want to give their names real quick, because they are very important to this. And that is Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick. They grew up on things like Tales from the Dark Side, things like Unsolved Mysteries, just like you and me. And they found something about a true story terrifying. And they channeled that into this movie. They said, let's make something that feels like we're watching a real thing. And because that's the stuff that scared me. I don't know about you, Damon, but like, Tales from the Dark Side or Unsolved Mysteries, which is actually true crime, used to scare the shit out of me as a kid. And so seeing it on the screen and seeing like this internet campaign of like, this is the true story and the actual footage of people that went missing, even though my brain was like, it's not real, the depiction of it all really, really got under my skin.
I would argue, and again, this is of the age, because this is 1999, as you said, this is really at the beginning of when everyone was starting to get on the internet. Not everyone was on the internet, you know what I mean? Like, it was that age where, like, not a lot of people were on the internet, but it was starting to be like there were internet message boards, there were websites you could go to find out about films. It was starting to be like the early days of like really getting bombarded with online stuff. But again, still very rudimentary in terms of the websites and the information out there. You had to really search it out. It wasn't a Google thing where you could just search and find information. You had to go to the website, and they had a website set up for this. I would argue that this is possibly the greatest marketing scheme for a lower budget movie ever.
Yeah, probably.
They had, when they went to, I want to say it was either Sundance or when they went to Cannes, they had missing posters made, and they were plastering them and having people hand them out all over town with the 3 missing actors missing, gone since 1994. It looked like legitimate missing posters, like what you would see, like someone has gone missing, in real life. They went as far as having the actors' IMDb pages listed them as deceased. I mean, they went really out there to prove that this was real. And I'm not going to lie to you, Patrick. I watched Faces of Death as a kid.
Me too.
That I thought that was real at the time when I saw it. Now, granted, I was a much younger kid. Certainly should not have been watching Faces of Death. But there was I was the flip of you. I was like, of course there was part of me that was skeptical. Like, this can't be real. But at certain points, as I got ready to go see this movie for the first time, I was like, I think this might be real. Like, they sold it so well.
Mm-hmm.
The actors had been in nothing else. So it's not like you could look on, oh, well, she was in this or he was in this. Or
also, that just wasn't the time when you could do that.
Yeah, like even like cinephiles, like I was a cinephile. Like even at that point, I was a bit of a cinephile. I wasn't nearly as much as I am now, but even then, I was familiar with TV and film. Like I was a pretty voracious absorber of film and television. Even I was like, I'd never heard of these people before, and they did such a remarkable job of selling it as real. Mm-hmm. And I also, to my discredit, so to speak, as much of a horror fan as I was growing up in the 80s on Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween and Friday the 13th and Monster Squad and things like that, I didn't know what a Cannibal Holocaust was. I didn't learn about Cannibal Holocaust till years later. So I didn't even know this was of the same genre. I know there's another one, The Last Broadcast, another one that came out in the late 80s that is another found footage movie that a lot of people believe that the Blair Witch borrowed from, for lack of a better word. But I had never seen anything like this. So this was a first for me. So I'm just being like that. So first, never seen Cannibal Holocaust, didn't know it existed at the time. Didn't know The Last Broadcast existed, never seen it. This was the first found footage movie I'd ever heard of, and the viral marketing campaign sold it so well that this was real. By the time I walked into that theater, I wasn't sure. Now you were the skeptic, and you said, I can't believe this is real, but they were convincing you otherwise. I was the flip where I was like, I think this might be real, but I'm not sure. So they did a phenomenal job getting me, because even I was like, is it possible? Because it seems so impossible. But again, the way they sold it, 3 filmmakers went into the woods in Maryland to do a documentary on this witch. They disappeared a year later. Their footage was found. This is what was discovered. They sold it in such a brilliant way that when you watch it, and also, let's be clear, when you watch the film, the people using the cameras are the people in the film. This is like, they did it in such, like, when you watch found footage today, and I'm a little, like, I know are not a found footage fan in general. Right. You're just not a found footage fan. I would say I'm like one step above you. Like I do, like Hell House LLC is a really
But that's good. I like that one.
I really enjoy Paranormal Activity, the first one. There's a few I like. Now I'm not gonna sit here and say I like them in large though. I would just say if you like 2 or 3, I like 4 or 5. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Yeah, something like that.
But it's not my. There are people who are huge found footage genre fans.
Yeah.
That's totally okay.
And they probably hate you and me after our review of Outlander, Outwaters. Those people don't listen to us anymore.
Yes, those people do not listen to us. But so when I see a lot of found footage movies now, they're not trying to. They're using the same concept of like, this really happened, but no one believes it. So you can see a lot of professional camera tricks, and they're not as shaky with the cameras because, like there's a lot of people who left this movie with motion sickness because the shakiness of the cameras and things like that. But in this film, it felt real that these were 3 college students carrying around a real good camera, a high 16, I think, or what it was, and then like a high 8, like a real camcorder going back and forth. Like, you believed, and they really were carrying, like, this was really, those 3 people we'll talk about, they really were the ones carrying the cameras the entire time. So they sold it in such a way, and then when you saw it, they sold it in such a way, you're like, maybe? This looked like footage. Like, this really looked, there's nothing in here to look professionally done. And so, I don't know, like I said, I would argue, it can never happen again. We're in the information age where everything's available on the internet. You could barely walk into a movie now and not have it spoiled for you. I mean, that's like how far we are now. Like, you could barely walk into a brand new movie coming out on a Thursday night, and you go to the first showing, and you're still walking a fine line of someone ruining the ending for you, depending on what you're going to see.
Welcome to my hell.
Yeah, that's how hard it is today. So you could never ever do this again. But for 1999, at the time, I would argue this is quite possibly the best marketing for a film ever.
I fully agree. And this is the thing, because like you can always say like, well, look, I saw the trick happen once. Like I know how they pull the rabbit out of the hat, so it's never going to work for me again. But that's also, by the way, not the case, because I like Hell House LLC, and I do like Lake Mungo. Like, they're very similar actually to the Blair Witch. They're documentary style and all that. But what really stands out on this last viewing for me for the Blair Witch isn't so much just like, wow, like, yeah, there was a great like viral campaign at the time, and it sure did, it sure did catch me by surprise, because I've never seen anything like that. All of that stuff is true. But what really is true about this movie is its execution. The way they executed this movie still hasn't been done. Some might argue that like Paranormal Activity is about as close as it gets, and I can kind of agree with that. It's like the execution of the movie sells it in that way. The acting, I mean, and you're talking about very deliberate filmmakers here. They deliberately sought out improvisational actors who could emote in a genuine way. They were looking for a very specific style of acting, and they found it in the actors that they found. Then they decided to build up inside the movie the actual mythology, which is, we're out here doing a documentary on the Blair Witch. That's what we're doing. That's why these people are even out here. So you have a great, like a premise setup. And then they show you, the early bits of their filmmaking, and it's they're interviewing townsfolk. And by the way, these townsfolk, you're dead convinced that they're real townsfolk. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Like some of the most convincing people actually ended up being an actor. But that's how detailed these directors were. Not unlike a Steven Spielberg, or like what's his name? Kubrick, Stanley Kubrick, where they were so intensely detailed with everything that they put out there, because they wanted to sell it as something that was real. They didn't want to put a trick in front of you. They wanted every piece of it to feel authentic. Like so many found footage movies nowadays, they vamp for the sake of vamping. They're like, oh, that's what you do, because the Blair Witch did that. They vamped. They just kind of went around and talked about stuff for a while, and they wasted time. That's not what they were doing in the Blair Witch. They were setting up a mythology. They were setting up important plot points. When they would talk to townsfolk, you would hear something, and that something would pay off later. Just like any other movie. They were making a movie. They weren't making a found footage movie. They were making a movie. They just were so intensely focused on every minute detail that the presentation of it, even as I watched it a few nights ago for this podcast, I was like, I could still buy this as real. Even though I know everything you can possibly know about this movie, and it still plays as real, because the intention for them was to design it as something real, not to design a found footage movie, which is what all found footage movies now do, Paranormal Activity included. Even like the reason they kept filming, which is something I always bump up against with newer found footage movies. The reason they kept filming is because they couldn't always film on the CP16, which, by the way, I've shot on a CP16. It was cool to like see that. I was like, oh shit, I've used those. She has the camcorder because she can document more things more often because they only have so much film with them. And they're going to go out into the woods, so they can't just shoot everything on that. So she shoots everything else on that, and she sort of, you could tell like the way they build the character of Heather is she's a very like determined and somewhat dramatic, director in her own right, and she has a vision for all of this. And I do think a little bit of the Outwaters when I think of that. I go, oh, that's kind of what they were doing in the Outwaters. They're trying to portray a director with a grand vision. That's exactly what Heather was. And they set it up with all these little things and all these little details. It's just such an intensely detailed movie that I can't deny its brilliance in that respect.
So let me dole out a little bit of information about how this film got made so we can talk about that, because I found a couple of great articles. This film turned 20 in 1999, so there were a lot of interviews with the director and the actors from the film who talked about how this got made. So let me just run down a little bit.
1999 or 2019?
2020. I said 1999 to 2019, the 20th anniversary. Let me run down some of the facts I learned about this movie so we can talk about it. So the film was originally written as a 35-page outline. There was no dialogue. They wanted this all to be improvisation. So when they were doing casting for the film, and I believe it was done in New Jersey, they put a call out for actors who have improvisation skills. And when the actors walked in, there was like a line of the producers, two of the directors, of course, Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. And as soon as the actors walked in, the first thing they said to them was, you're getting out, you're in state, you've been in prison for 12 years, you're standing for the parole board, convince us you need to be let out of jail. That was it. And everyone who stumbled, faltered, stuttered, couldn't quite come up with it, they just exited out. The people who got cast, Josh Leonard, Michael Williams, and Heather Donahue, were the ones who nailed it. And Heather Donahue, they said, was the one who scared them, because when they said, why should we let you go? And Heather Donahue stared them dead in the face, cold eyes, and she said, you shouldn't let me go. And they were like, fuck yes, you're hired. So that's first off. So that's how they got cast. Then they traveled to Maryland, where it really was filmed. There is a town in Maryland called Burkittsville. They made up the mythology of, it used to be a town called Blair, and they did use some past mythology about witches from the Salem witch trials and things like that, and kind of interlace it with what became the Blair Witch. Filming took place over 8 days in the woods. They dumped the actors in the woods, and the directors never interacted with the actors during the set. At first, I guess they said they thought about it, they tried to do it, but it was clear that it wasn't working to get what they wanted out of the film. So the directors basically left. Like they were on set, but the actors in the woods camping were all by themselves. At the beginning of each new day, they had a GPS system where they could go find these flags were planted by the filmmakers overnight, and they would find these little 35 millimeter canisters with notes for each actor, and the actor was told, do not tell the other actors what's in here, and this is what you're going to be doing for the day. So all the dialogue you're hearing is them, the actors. That's them coming up with their own dialogue. None of that is scripted. There was one note, and you'll know this part in the film, Heather got a note that said, today you're going south. You know you're going south, and you're convinced south is the way. Do not let anyone talk you out of it. So there's a very compelling scene where they're lost, and Heather is just like, we've been heading south the whole time. We need to keep heading south. There was a part for Josh Leonard where he finally reached a breaking point where they said, you're at your wit's end, you need to snap. And that's the scene. And apparently the original version is that Mike in the film was going to disappear and Josh and Heather were going to be left behind. But apparently the friction between Josh and Heather was so bad and so real, they ended up choosing Josh to get X'd out of the movie at that point because he was just done. But the scene in the film where Josh is filming Heather and he says, what's your motivation? You're lost in the woods. You don't know where you're at. What's your motivation? That was really Josh at his breaking point making this movie. He was done. And that got so real. And they were like, when they did that, when they saw it, that was really Heather like at her breaking point too, because her and Josh were apparently at odds. And that was them saying, you've reached your breaking point, you're about to snap. And that was his direction. And that's what happened. That's what came out of that little bit of direction, was that brilliant scene, which to me is one of the best scenes in the entire film.
Yeah, it's intense.
So the entire thing was improvised. When it was all said and done, they had about 20 hours of footage. And all the things you see in the nighttime when they were, the actors all did the interviews and they were like, so we would be cold, and every day that they were there, they would give them less and less food. So day one, everyone got sandwiches and chips and drinks. Day two, they just got chips and drinks. Day three, they just got chips. Like they were never in danger, but they were slowly but surely probably descending them into madness and hunger and tiredness, what these actors were really going through. There was a quote, I wish I would have written it down from one of the interviews, where they said that you'll never be in danger, but your safety is our main concern, but your comfort is not.
Right.
That was the quote they told the actors. Your safety is our primary concern, your comfort is not. So they were never like, malnourished or in any kind of danger, but they were like, you're getting the bare minimum to get you to that breaking point. When they got messed with at night, they had recorded real children, and they recorded on a boombox and they played it in the woods. And Josh Leonard told a story in one of the interviews where he said that they were cold, they were hungry, they were tired, they were wet, and they would just nod off, and then they'd start messing with them. And he said the actors would wake up, and he said, we were never really scared, we were pissed off. we'd finally go to sleep, and like an hour later they'd start messing with us, and we'd all wake up going, we got to get dressed again and start dealing with this shit. So when they messed with the tent, everything was, they didn't know any of that was happening. They just knew something was going to come.
Yeah.
The scene with Josh. So the scene where Josh goes missing and they give them the twigs all tied together with Josh's shirt. When Heather finds that outside of the tent, she actually threw it. Like that was really
right. She got rid of it.
And the director, one of the camera, eventually had to come in and be like, no, we need you to open it, because like that's the whole point. Like she wasn't going to open it, and so when she did, she opened it. They used part of Josh's shirts. That's real human teeth in there that they got from a dentist, and blood, a little bit of Josh's hair they cut off. So that's all real. The only thing that they really had scripted was when they went to the ending in the house. They basically told them what they're going to see and where they want it to end. But he's like, that scene in the house, the very end scene with Mike in the corner and Heather finding him, the Eduardo Sanchez said that's probably the only scene in the film that is close to an actual production. Like they actually produced that scene so it could look right for the ending. Otherwise, almost everything else you're seeing in this film was improvised, the dialogue, the action. This was all part of what Heather, Josh, and Mike did. Sorry for that long diatribe. I just wanted to get through all the facts of what it took to make this movie and how crazy and how insane it is and how blown away we should all be by what resulted.
Yeah, I mean, when you really look at it like that, you go, holy shit, like these actors made this movie. Yeah. Like they really did. Now, obviously there's the run up. There's like the first 13 minutes of the movie where they're doing a very deliberate, like documentary style thing. But the meat of this movie, the stuff that gets under your skin, the stuff that scares you, is just actors with cameras reacting. That's it. I mean, it might be the greatest improvisational piece ever made. Forget about found footage for a second. Forget about horror for a second. Just in pure improvisational respect, it's incredible work. And you talk about that final scene too. I believe the filmmakers, like Eduardo and Daniel, were actually like filming some of that stuff too. Like they actually got in, they put the cameras on their shoulders and filmed what they needed to film to get like certain pieces of it. They even, when they finally cut that together, they didn't really like the ending that they had. They got more money to shoot the endings that they had envisioned. They tried them out, they cut them in, and in the end they went with the most raw version, which is what you see there. They actually ended up sticking with that part that they originally thought they weren't going to like anyway. But man, oh man, what a fucking movie, dude. What a fucking, it's just like one thing, like it's like this shining beacon in the middle of of all of horror where you're like, look what happened here. And by the way, I say in horror, it was an international smash hit that made like half a billion dollars, like when it was all said and done. It made huge amounts of money. Incredible success because it is a lightning in a bottle moment. I know that everything that it inspired, by the way, a lot of it does very well, by the way. Paranormal Activity, it spawned a franchise, spawned a production companies. We talk about Host as one of the more successful movies that's out there in found footage. The VHS anthologies, they continue on and on. But it really started here. Sorry, Cannibal Holocaust. Like, we know you exist, but truth be told, the world was fucking knocked on its ass by what the filmmakers and actors were able to achieve.
Well, yeah, it's like, I mean, and I mean this with absolute love and respect for Cannibal Holocaust, but it's like the people who say, well, Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Halloween aren't the first slasher movies. It was actually the one Dario Argento movie from the early 70s. I can't remember.
Or Psycho, they say Psycho's a slasher.
Yeah, but like, again, it's not about being the first. It's about being the one most influential. Like, I would argue, like, Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween were far more influential. Maybe they were influenced by that Dario Argento movie, but they ended up influencing hundreds of films after them. And that's where you're talking about Blair Witch Project. It's not a knock on Cannibal Holocaust or The Last Broadcast, but Blair Witch created this genre. It did. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really did. Because it was at a time and a place where everything that could have gone right for this movie went right. I mean, again, they're at a time when information was available, but not totally available. The internet existed, but it wasn't certainly what it is today. The actors involved were so unknown that I remember, I'll never forget this. I remember, so I knew after I saw it, I realized that this was all planned and it was all, not real. But I remember it was right after that, maybe like a month after that when I saw this, Heather Donahue starred in a Steak and Shake commercial. I saw a commercial, I was like, hey, it's Heather Donahue from the Blair Witch Project. So, like, that's when I was like, oh, wow. They're like, they're just regular. Like, at that point, I knew it wasn't real, but I thought they weren't actually actors. I thought they were just, like, friends of the filmmaker or something. I didn't think they actually were, trying to be actors. You mentioned the improvisation. I want to go back to that real quick. Because watching this, I watched it last night. I've seen this movie 1,000 times, but watching it last night, again, the critical eye, I know I say it all the time, the critical eye. Watching it last night, I was blown away by some of the exchanges and the dialogue in this film, how funny and scary and real it felt. And a lot of it is, like I said, there was moments where Josh Leonard was apparently about ready to lose his shit. And he was done. Heather Donahue, same way, and then Mike was kind of like the guy caught in the middle. But there are some really good exchanges. Like, there's a great line in there where Mike says, Mike had the best lines in this movie. Mike says, when they're talking about, like, someone's messing with him, and he's like, if this is he's like, I don't think this is rednecks. No redneck is that creative. I cracked up. I was like, what a great line. And that's all improv. Like, that's all him coming up with that line. I'm blown away by that. Like, even that part of it, the fact that none of the dialogue was actually planned, and this was just the actors doing it, including, Heather Donahue's infamous scene,
her monologue,
with her close up on the eye. All they told her in there was, you're scared, you're convinced you're going to die, and you apologize for what's happened. And so the rest of that's her. When she's like, I want to apologize to my mom, I want to apologize to Mike's mom, I want to apologize to Josh's mom. We're out here, we're lost, and I think we're going to die. That's all Heather. Like, that's all her coming up with that in that moment. That snot-filled, tear-filled face, that's all her.
Yeah. I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to keep them open.
That whole thing, like, the fact that they all made up their own dialogue, to me, is, like, maybe arguably the most impressive part about this film, because it all works. Like, they also sell it really well. Like, there was a plot point at one point where they were going to have Josh and Heather be exes, because there's a line early on where Heather says, when she goes to pick up Josh, and she says, oh, Mr. Punctuality. And they were kind of playing that into that. What actually happened was apparently Josh showed up really late to set that day. And so she used that with the whole Mr. Punctuality, but they dropped that storyline early on. but they knew each other, and then Mike was kind of like the guy who got hired for the project.
Right.
So they sold it in such a way that they knew each other, but they weren't totally like comfortable with each other. Like if you and I went on a trip, like we would know each other so well that we wouldn't have those same kind of interactions. But if you just hired like a sound guy for one of your movies and you had good recommendations, you kind of knew who he was, you'd be a little more apprehensive to get like that personal with him. Yet you'd also be a little bit more combative because you're like, I don't know this dude. That's how they were, and that's how they sold it. And I'm like, to this day, I'm blown away at how well they did that.
And that's why I think it stands heads and tails. And no offense to any of the other found footage movies, it just stands heads and tails above them because of the fact that you had three really, really great improvisational actors. I don't know that most found footage movies these days even consider that. This was something that was key to the filmmakers. They said the casting process. The casting process was arduous. They saw hundreds and hundreds of people. They looked for just the exact right people to get it done. And then it shows in the final product because they knew, the filmmakers knew, they're like, however we're going to do this, if it works, they didn't even know if it would work. But if it works, we don't have to do much of a reshoot or try this take again, or we don't want to have to do that. We need it to feel authentic and real and scary because that was the most important part. Whereas nowadays it's more about just like, oh, like how do I inject something that looks insane into my what is supposedly found footage movie. It's kind of like the genre itself has like lost sight of what made the genre something to look at, which is authenticity. And I've said this before when we talked about Outwaters, I think it was, the reason why Blair Witch and Hell House LLC and Lake Mungo are three, to me, really great found footage movies is that they try to stay dead center in reality. Even the most insane things that happen in those movies, they still try to ground them. They still try to funnel them to something that could maybe happen to you, as opposed to being outrageous and crazy. I'm not gonna buy ghosts, but like in Hell House LLC, I might be scared that there's somebody in a clown outfit in my haunted house trying to kill me. Like that's realistic on some level. And Lake Mungo, I don't understand the weird aberrations going on in the photos. And then it's all backed up by sort of a documentary, narrative that is put in front of you to try and make sense of it all. So, but even those two movies, which I love, Lake Mungo, Hell House LLC, the Blair Witch goes, we want to leave no doubt in your mind that everything you see could have happened. And it's important. The redneck stuff is important because and this really stuck out to me on this last viewing. You could argue that they were never haunted by a witch, that it was always like a deliverance situation where there were just woods people, hill people that were like torturing them and following this little crew around and screwing with them. Now Eduardo and Daniel have said time and time again, no, it's definitely the Blair Witch. When they come across all the stick figures and stuff, they've entered into this new territory that they will never come out of. Okay. But at least on its face, you could go, maybe this was just people fucking with them. Even the end.
Don't know. Well, I want to talk about this anyway, so let's get into this before we get to categories. I want to talk about the effect of scares in this movie because we never see the antagonist. Ever.
Never.
We talk about them a lot in the beginning. That Mary Brown interview at the beginning when she talks about her interaction with what she believed was the Blair Witch, the woman with the hair, all that. That's really freaky. It's
really freaky, and that was the one actor that they used.
Yeah, that was really freaky the way they described that. But we never see the antagonist. Everything they do works so well, yet we never see any of it. Outside the tent, you hear the children. You hear the noises, the cracking in the woods. Then you hear, something going outside, and they get chased and they're running through the woods. Josh goes missing. You hear him screaming in the woods, like they're trying to find him, and then obviously that leads them eventually into the house where the film ends. That one night where the tent gets attacked, where something rattles the tent. it's so effective yet so simple.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing that gets me, that like watching this last night, rewatching it last night, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, this was one of the scariest films I've ever experienced in a theater. It remains one of the only films that's truly scared me in a moment, like when I watched it for the first time. And it just, not that I knew this, but like it just clicked in my head when I was watching it last night. I was like, we never see anything. Like, you see the aftermath, you see the morning where they have the piles of rock the one morning, it's kind of freaky.
Sure.
You see the stick figures, which is kind of freaky. The bundle with the bloody teeth and the hair, that's freaky. But we never actually see anything, even in the house, which I would argue that final scene, which we'll talk about quite a bit later in categories, I'll just, spoiler alert. I would argue that's one of probably the 10 scariest scenes I've ever seen in a horror film.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I want to talk about that when we get there.
You see nothing. You see handprints, child handprints on the wall, which is freaky. You see more of the little more of the little twig figures and the iconography. You see nothing. There's no Blair Witch. There's no dude. There's no rednecks. There's nothing. Yet it works perfectly.
It really does. It really does, Damon. And we'll elaborate that more on categories, which are brought to you by mammothheadwear.com. Yes, Mammoth Headwear, which I'm wearing right now. Look at this, Damon. I'm actually using, pretty much all the tabs on this hat. My old hats, it's like 1-2 tabs if you're lucky. Mammoth Headwear has designed hats for big old heads like Damon, like mine, like many other people out there who go, just like, hats don't fit me right. Mammoth Headwear hats fit you very well. If you got a big head, you got to have Mammoth Headwear. Go to mammothheadwear.com, enter the code REWIND at checkout for 10% off and free shipping on your first order, and visit them on Instagram at Mammoth Headwear.
And I will say this, Patrick, you're wearing a normal hat right now, and I'm thinking you must have a very regular sized head. No,
you'd be wrong, Damon.
You just have a great hat that makes you look like you have a normal sized head, because I know that pain. I know the V shape on my forehead when I try to wear a snapback hat backwards. It does not work out well. Have to wear it forwards, and then at that point, I've got like the cue ball head where it's like you can see like my head's all concaved in.
Oh yeah,
the hair, the hat's just tucking my head together.
Terribly misshapen. Damon, I have a massive head. I'm going to go on one quick tangent here. I was taking a picture with 2 of my fellow jiu-jitsu practitioners, and I was standing, I'd say about a half a foot behind them, and I'm not a big guy. I'm 5'4". One guy's 6'2", the other guy's 6 foot. They're massive, massive men. We look at the picture, and my head is bigger than both of their heads. And my coach, who was one of the guys, is about 6'2", 200 pounds of muscle, goes, I thought when people are like behind you, like the head gets smaller. So that means your head's like even bigger than that. Massive dome, Damon. It's been hard. Many, many years as an adult trying to find a good hat. Mammoth Headwear has the hat for you.
It's the only way to go. Go there, enter the code REWIND, get your 10% off, and get you a hat that fits you, that doesn't make you feel like you've been squeezed into a hat that just does not work for your head. Because I know that pain, Patrick. I know that pain.
Don't wear a hat that makes you look like you got decked by the Blair Witch in the fucking basement of the burnt out old house. Get a hat that actually fits your head, that looks good on your head.
Yeah, that when you take it off, you don't have to wait for the blood to go rushing back to your head. The hat's cut off all the blood to your head. Don't do that.
All the pain of big heads. Mammoth Headwear's got the cure.
Thank you, Mammoth Headwear. Thank you for the support. All right, let's get to categories, and let's kick things off as we do each and every week here on the show and talk about best performance. We only have 3 to talk about. Before we get started on this real quick, can I mention that the 3 actors who were in this movie, they were all actors at the time. Since the movie ended, only one of them has continued acting, and that's Joshua Leonard, who I've actually seen in quite a bit of stuff since then. He actually starred in another horror film from 2004 that is so little known, but I actually have it on DVD behind me. It's called Madhouse. Mm-hmm. I love that movie. Now, I did not get good reviews, and a lot of horror websites said it was cheesy and just kind of like borrowed from other movies or ripped off for other movies, for other lack of a better word. But I actually really liked that movie. At some point, way down the road, I would love to talk about that on the podcast because it's such a little-known movie from the early 2000s, but I own it. I love it. It's called Madhouse. But Joshua Leonard's been in a lot of stuff. He was in a lot of movies. He was on the show Scorpion on CBS. He's married to Allison Pill, who, of course, was a great actress on The Newsroom. She was in the new Picard show. I love her.
Scott Pilgrim.
She's an incredible. Yeah, she's in Scott Pilgrim. She's an incredible actress. I'm a big fan of hers. That's her husband. So he's the only one. Heather has talked openly about how the Blair Witch kind of ruined her life. Like, they all used their real names, which they all regretted afterwards. Because
they should not have done that.
Yeah, they should not have done that. So that was first off, but they all used their real names. So Heather Donahue, like, it just kind of haunted her after this movie because, like, there were people who were convinced she was actually dead. They were sending condolence messages to her parents and stuff, thinking she was actually dead. And then she never kind of came out of this. So she ended up becoming a medical marijuana grower, wrote a book about it, wrote another book somewhere along the way, and the carryover from the Blair Witch Project was so intense for her that she actually changed her name. So her name is now Ray Hance, REI Hance, Ray Hance. That's how
she's like, thanks a lot, Damon, for giving out my new real name.
I mean, it's on Wikipedia, so I'm give away the secrets, but that's how bad it got for her. She changed her freaking name. Josh Leonard stayed an actor, still an actor to this day. If you look at his IMDb page, he has credits all the way up till 2022, 2023. Still very busy actor today. Michael Williams, who is the third guy, he did do a couple other little things. He actually used to be a furniture mover for the Conan O'Brien show, I believe. That's what he did when he got cast, and he went back to it after the movie was over. But he's now a guidance counselor in school. So, like, Josh is the only one of the three who stuck around from acting, which is crazy. But let's talk about best performance, because at the time, these were all young 20-something actors who had the world in front of them. And then the Blair Witch Project.
They had to go and choose a movie that would basically, tank their career for good reasons. Kind of, it's like they did too well. They convinced the world that these were real characters, and they could never quite shake from there. Josh seems to have been able to shake it in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, to me, the best performance amongst three great performances, and I genuinely enjoyed all of them. It does go to Heather Donahue, who plays our lead character, Heather. There's a lot of great nuance in there, like in the early part of the movie where she's like this over serious documentarian. That might seem melodramatic today. It is not. If you watched documentaries in the 90s, boy, that was accurate. Like, it really she really felt like the kind of documentarian that I would see in 90s type documentaries. But what really got me was when the fear crept in. Now, you talk about the great monologue, and obviously that's a huge part of this. She designed that monologue. She pointed the camera. The way she pointed it was not directed. She did all of that. So that's just part of everything. But as the fear sets in this movie, as she realizes that she unwittingly got two people lost in the woods with her, the way her character changes, the way her character breaks down, and the way that all the stress confronts her and the way she reacts to it is genius. It is maybe quitting acting was a smart thing, because she sort of gave the performance of a lifetime. It was really incredible stuff. And Damon, the screams. We've talked about this before. It's hard to be a good screamer. Not everyone can do it. Her screams are blood curdling. They're haunting. They're scary. In the final sequence of the movie, when I think when Mike's down with the one camera that's rolling sound, and she's up with the CP16, which has no sound, and they're cutting between this footage, and you can hear her screams in the distance because it's being recorded all the way downstairs, but the camera is seeing up there. It's a really great visual trick. I love that they did it with the way they play with the visuals and the sound. That scream is so scary. That scream is the scream of like real fear. And that, to me, is priceless. I believed in those moments that she was scared for her life.
Well, we've said this before in the show, and if you talk to most actors, and you and I have talked to a lot of actors over the years, most actors will tell you the two hardest things to do in films are comedy and horror because they're all about timing. You have to be able to do it right with timing to get it proper. And screaming and acting scared or saying something funny and having the time to do that are really hard to do. Like, comedy and horror acting don't get enough credit because when we see the Oscars and you see award shows, it's always the really super dramatic movies. And I get it. I understand that. I'm not saying that dramatic actors don't show range. They're obviously incredible at what they do. But if you talk to a lot of actors, they talk about, like, comedic acting is really hard and horror acting is really hard because the timing and the little things you have to do to sell it. Because if you don't sell it right, it just will not work and it will ruin the movie. Heather Donahue, the way she sold being scared and terrified and the transformation of her confidence early on, to me, was what really sold her part in this movie. Because she was kind of like the cocksure filmmaker,
She was the leader.
Yeah, like she's like, and you talk about the documentary, like, it's so funny when she's like, "We overlook Burkittsville, Maryland." Like, that's so documentaries of the 90s.
Yeah.
She's so super serious and into it, and she's like, "We're gonna get to Coffin Rock and we're gonna do this." Like, she's the one leading the charge. And then when she realizes that things have gotten too real, she gets scared out of her mind. And watching that transformation is remarkable. And that's range, Patrick. It takes range to go to both places.
Yeah.
You might be able to act scared, but you can't do the serious stuff. You might be able to act serious, but you can't do the scared stuff. She does them both and does them seamlessly.
She even does some funny stuff. Like, she's got a couple little quips in there that strike me funny too. Just a top shelf performance.
I felt it really good early in the movie when they're in the hotel room and they're taking the drink from the bottle and she takes the shot and she goes, "I fucking hate scotch." And I was like, I feel you, Heather, because I hate scotch also. So that line made me laugh when she said that. So for me, best performance, I knew you were going with Heather and listen, I think all three performances are great. I really do.
They're all good.
And what's funny is I love Josh's performance, especially that motivation scene, which I mentioned earlier, talking about, the scene where he just finally loses it. And he's just basically, that's really him going off on Heather in the film.
It's an uncomfortable scene.
What's your motivation? You're lost in the woods. Like, really. But my best performance, honestly, at the end of the day, went to Mike Williams. I loved Mike. He was the comedic relief, but he was also, again, he did it really, really well, switching from kind of like being the comedic relief, the comedy, and also being fed up with all this shit. And then the end scene with him running through screaming for Josh, like, "Where are you, Josh? Where are you?" When he tells them that he kicked the map into the river, and like just watching their faces drop, and he's just like laughing, and he's just like, "It was doing us this." I kicked that fucker into the water, and they're all like, "What?" They're all like, "Are you serious?" And they're just like so pissed off. And like and again, I mentioned the line with the like, "This isn't rednecks. No redneck is this creative." He had some really funny lines. Like, he could have gone on to be a really good comedy actor. I loved his performance. He, to me, was the best part of the trio because he did show a lot of range. He was the funny guy. He was also the only outsider. Like, he was the guy who didn't know anybody. Like, when you see him at the very beginning, he says, "Hey, thanks for including me in this project," because he didn't really know them. That they weren't selling it as like he knew these people. He was just a newcomer in this whole group. I just loved his performance, and of course the ending going to the house. Like, he sold being on a purpose, trying to find Josh, but also being scared at the same time, which is very possible. You're running, searching, looking, but you're also terrified around every corner. I just really liked his performance, and it's so weird that he's like the one, even as I mentioned, Heather was doing commercials and stuff at least a little bit. He did nothing. Like, he never went on to do anything else. He's now a guidance counselor doing his own thing, and that's awesome. But yeah, like, I was just really blown away by his performance, watching it over the years and then watching it again last night.
It is quite a nuanced performance. Yeah. I mean, I think all three of these people would agree with you. They gave their best performances to this movie for sure. Maybe Josh has an opinion on that, but I don't know. I was so blown away by what Mike did. Because at first he is the outsider, and it shows when shit starts getting kind of funky. he goes on the defense hard because he's like, I don't know these people. And like now, so he just starts by being pissed and kind of rabid a little bit. And also he's a knucklehead. He kicked the map into the river, and he knew he shouldn't have done that. But like knuckleheads do shit like that, and then they regret it like really hard. And that he kind of goes through that part of it. And then when people really start breaking down, something weird happens to him. He sort of rises to the occasion and becomes the person who can comfort, the person who's using voice of reason, because he's like, shit, I kind of fucked all this up, and they're really like, these two are really not doing well. Like, and he tries to like fight his way back and like try to help the group out. So that his character takes a lot of different turns, and he does a really good job of steering.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. And also, again, I want to give credit where credit's due. It's funny because Josh Leonard's the one who went on to do a full acting career. He was great also. Like, there's not a bad performance in this movie. I really liked all three. Joshua Leonard does an incredible job. That motivation speech is so uncomfortable in the best of ways. And he does kind of take on a little bit of like, you can tell Josh and Heather are clashing for leadership. You know what I mean? Like that relationship, you can see why by the time Josh got pulled out and they took him to a Denny's and let him have a real meal for the first time in like 6 days, that he was done. Like he was just, because they just had they had the alpha personalities, and Mike was very much the Robin to their Batman, and he was okay being the second guy. And you could tell those two were just like, you could 100% tell Heather and Josh were at each other's throats by like day 5.
Oh yeah.
And so, like, I could see where they're like, you know what? We're going to save Mike and get Josh out here because we're going to kill each other. Because they have very similar personalities. They both want to be leaders. Like, Josh is the filmmaker. Heather is the documentary. I don't know, but you know, whatever. Like he's the one, he's like, I know what I'm doing. I'm the director. And she's like, no, I'm the director. And they're just, I mean, they're at odds. They're at each other's throats, and they sell it so well. You can if you didn't know this was improv, you thought it was all scripted, you would be like, damn, they scripted this good, because those two did not like each other. And by the time this was all over, I don't think they really did like each other very much.
Yeah, I don't get the impression that they became friends, like that everybody became friends after this movie. Like I think they basically went on their own merry ways. They were like, I'm sick of seeing you, and I don't think I ever want to really see you again. I mean, look, there is another side. There is a whole other topic that we're not really going to touch on, but like, was this even ethical? Like how they made this movie? And I think the filmmakers tried to be considerate. And they made it clear, like, you're never going to truly be in danger, but they push them on an emotional level. And, you know, like I don't like what Kubrick did, that he tortured actors. He was notorious for doing that. Were they torturing actors here? I don't know. That's up for debate. Like, they told them what was going to happen. They knew the outline of the movie. They knew what it was going to be. Everything was laid bare before them. And they just said, now go execute it yourselves, with all these little obstacles in the way. But I mean, it shows in those performances, and maybe that's part of why they were like, I don't want to do this anymore.
I give the filmmakers a slight pass in this regard, because, and this is, again, I'm saying like, this is an excuse. It's a bad excuse, but it's an excuse. They had no idea what they were doing. You know what I mean? They're two filmmakers in college who got together at Central Florida and said, hey, let's make this movie. And there's no such thing really as found footage. So they're just going along. They're just making this up as they go along. They don't really know what they're doing. You know what I mean? So in that regard, like, I give them a pass, because, like, I don't think they were going out there intentionally being cruel to these people. But they also, as that line I mentioned earlier, your safety is never going to be a question, but we're concerned about your safety. We're not concerned about your comfort. You're going to be uncomfortable. And they've said, they've done interviews since then. And if you watch, I think there's a Vice article that does, like, they have all the interviews with everybody from the cast and the directors. They talk about it. And I think it was Josh or Mike said, like, we had food. We were never not cared for. Like, they never like put us in a situation where we were really in danger or really, you know, in harm's way. But we were teetering on the edge of, like, sleep deprivation, and we were hungry and cold and wet. And I mean, people volunteer to go do Survivor and Naked and Afraid shit, the reality shows, and I'd wager they're in far more like actual danger than any of these people. So I don't know. Like it was also an 8-day shoot like that. Like when I heard it was only 8 days, I was like, damn, they got a lot accomplished in 8 days.
They did.
Because like if this was a 30-day shoot, then maybe I'd be like, damn, they really tortured these people. But like. I remember I went camping after my senior year of high school, and we went camping out. We did a trip through Utah, South Dakota, Wyoming, and I can't remember. Oh, it was Utah, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Wyoming. And we camped along the way. We didn't stay at a hotel during 2-week camping, right? And there was one part of the trip for like 4 days where it was just torrential downpours. You could not stay dry in any way. And we had like the tents, and I slept in like a puddle of water for like 3 days straight. It was not like my friend's family who I went with. They weren't trying to torture me. That was just the circumstances we were stuck in.
Yeah.
And it was miserable. I mean, it was like 55 degrees at night. So it was like not super cold, but it was cold.
Yeah.
And it was wet, and it was just torrential for like 3 days straight. I mean, listen, could I say that was torture? Probably, but I was there on my own volition. I was on vacation. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, yeah, was it a bit extreme? Did they probably push them to a breaking point at certain times? Yeah, but again, they didn't give them anything they didn't tell them about. Like, you're going to be in the woods. You're going to be given minimal amounts of food and sleep, and, like, we want you to get pushed to that breaking point. So, you know, I agree, like the Stanley Kubrick thing. We've heard stories about directors who just flat out torture and mentally torture actors, and I don't agree with that. But I think I don't think it was as bad. I'm not living in it. I'm not saying I want to go spend a week of 8 days in the middle of Maryland with nothing but a bag of chips and a canteen of water. But you know, I think because here's the reality, Patrick. I think we got the performances and the movie we got because of how they were really at that, like Josh's monologue, Heather's monologue. I think a lot of that comes from the just desperation of how they were really feeling. I'm not saying they couldn't have acted that well, but we don't know if they had that range. But being really in that situation where you're cold, hungry, tired, alone, maybe you're just like, I'm done, and that's where you get the whole, like, you know, what's your motivation, or Mike screaming or Heather screaming. So, like, in a weird way, like, would we have even had the same movie if they're like, hey, let's all go out to Denny's after the shoot tonight and get fed and sleep in our hotels and go back out in the middle of the morning? You know what I mean? Like, you wonder if this film was as good as it was because of the conditions and everything they went through. I'd have to argue that that's a big part of it.
Oh, I'm sure it's a part of it. I mean, look, I can tell you this. If I had to sleep 2 nights in a tent, I could make that movie all on my own with all my real emotions and attitudes. I'm not a big camper. It's not really my thing. So I can definitely see how you can be pushed to the breaking point in 8 days in the cold, in the rain, not getting a lot of food and being tortured every night. Because I don't even sleep that good when I'm camping. When I'm camping, I sleep like shit. So imagine just like being so exhausted that you finally get some sleep. And then here's Eduardo Sanchez fucking rattling your tent and clapping wood. And you're like, shut the fuck up, Eduardo, motherfucker.
I watched this movie for the first time with my girlfriend. She had never seen it. She has real problem with found footage because she gets motion sickness. Like, she has real motion sickness. So found footage is not her jam. But she sat there with me last night, and she said she wasn't scared. I think a big part of that was because of the motion sickness. Like, she had to like look away from the TV a lot. But we were watching it, and I've been trying for years to convince her to go camping because I really do enjoy camping, and I miss doing it. And I'm like, I really want to go and watch that movie. I just totally screwed myself. There's no chance I'm going to get her to go anywhere but like the most well-funded campground in the world where you have like total amenities and you're around like 400 other people. I think that's the only way I'm going to get her to go camping now, because after watching that movie and watching them get lost, she's like, nope, not doing that. Like, damn it, I screwed myself here with this movie.
You want to scare people about going in the ocean? Show them Jaws. You want to scare people into not going camping? Show them the Blair Witch.
That's true. That's true. All right, let's talk about Best Scare, because this is a movie that legitimately terrified you and I, which is such a rare treat.
Yeah.
Patrick, what was your best scare in the Blair Witch Project?
My best scare, I actually channeled after watching it. I channeled, whatever, however old I was, 18-year-old Patrick or whatever, and I thought about what scared me the most out of all that stuff when I first watched it, and it really was Josh's screams in the night, because he goes missing, and you go, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, what does him going missing mean? And you don't really know how that's going to play out, and then when it does play out, when they can hear him somewhere in the distance in agony, it sounds like he's having his fingernails ripped off. Whatever that was, something about that visceralness of that, it's like chills me to my bones. Like, is it a scare? No, it's not like that. It's just like, oh God. Oh, like it's awful. It gets you, it gets you in the pit of your stomach. It gets you deep in your marrow. That the sound of him screaming in the darkness somewhere. I was just like, that scared me then, and this time it's still chilled me to the bone.
It's the escalation of the mental torture throughout this movie. By the time they get to Josh going missing and him screaming, they did it in a absolutely brilliant way. Because the first night they talk about, well, we heard something weird outside, and they kind of ignore it. Then they hear the cracking in the woods, which is freaky. Then you hear the children in the woods. Then the tent gets. They just keep escalating. So by the time Josh goes missing, and you hear him out in the woods screaming in agonizing pain, like what we have to imagine is them literally yanking his teeth out, which we find later in that little package. It works so well. It works so well because they've escalated it. And I know that's the point of a good horror movie, is to escalate the terror throughout the movie, but they do it in such a smart way. And then when you get to Josh's screams of pain and agonizing pain throughout the night, and you can't do anything about it. I think that adds to the terror, is you can't do anything about it because you hear it. You don't know where it's coming from. You're in the middle of the woods. You don't know, is he 10 feet away or 100 feet away? Because if you've ever been in the woods, Patrick, and it sounds like you don't really go to the woods much, but I've been in the woods a lot in camping and things like that. You hear noises in the woods.
Oh, yeah.
You really can't tell where they're coming from. Like, you don't know if they're like 3 feet away from you or 100 yards away from you, because echoes and the way sound travels, because you're not getting bouncing off rooms and walls and buildings like you would in a city, right? Like that's how it works. It's all open, so you don't know where things are coming from, and it's way freakier. And at night, if you've never gone camping and been in the woods at night, even if it's a well moonlit night, you ain't seeing shit. Okay, yeah. It is dark. Like, we live in cities. Like, we both live in big cities. You're never without light. Like, you're never without light of some kind. When you're in the woods in the middle of nowhere, unless you got a lantern lit or a flashlight, it is dark. Like, you are not seeing 3 feet in front of you. So when you add all those little elements in, and then you add in Josh screaming in agonizing pain, it is freaky as hell.
It's so freaky. Yeah, it really is. I mean, and I actually spend a lot of time in the woods for like filming and stuff like that, but I try not to sleep in the woods because it's not comfortable. But in the middle of the night, you hear that shit. And what you don't want to hear in the middle of the night is somebody screaming bloody murder, which is what that scene is.
Yeah. So my best scare, I mentioned it earlier, is the final scene. Without a doubt, the scene that freaked me out to the point where I was nearly covering my eyes in the theater. And I'm saying the final scene leading into Mike being in the corner, which was set up perfectly early in the film when they're doing the interviews with the townspeople. And the one guy goes, there was a child murderer in town, and the rumor was he would take 2 kids into his house and he would put one in the corner because he didn't want them looking at him while he killed the one kid, and then he'd pull the kid out of the corner and kill them. Very kind of like, it was a scene that you paid attention to, but then it pays off in the end because they said it like that. It's just a very matter-of-fact conversation. Yeah, the guy used to take kids in pairs up to his house, and he put one in the corner because he didn't want them looking at him when he killed the other one. Then he'd pull him out of the corner. Again, 30-second, 45-second scene, and that's in the midst of all those interviews. But when it gets to that ending, and they're like, it's a house. Now, first off, Fuck that, okay? Because I ain't going anywhere near that house. We've been in the woods for like 5 days at this point, or 4 days, or whatever it's been, and we've never come across a house, and now we suddenly come across this house in the middle of the night. Nope, going nowhere near that. Patrick, love you, best friend, co-host podcast. You're gone missing, and I hear you screaming out, and be like, wait till morning, Patrick!
No, seriously, Damon, help!
Yeah.
Help!
Wait till morning, I'll be there when it's light.
Fuck off, see you in the morning with cops and a bunch of fucking floodlights and shit.
Yeah, when I get the dogs up here. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. So like that in and of itself, but again, in the moment, you're freaky, you're running, you're screaming, you're trying to find your friend. Then you go in the house, and it is, if you've ever been in an abandoned, beat up, dilapidated house, they're terrifying. Woods broken, things on the walls. You see the handprints, the little Blair Witch symbols.
Mm-hmm.
Very freaky. You go upstairs, it's all freaky. Then you go in the basement, which is always a bad idea. Mike goes down, and he's just like, Josh, are you down here? And then camera falls over, he's done. Then you just hear Heather's pain screams throughout the house when she's calling to Mike. She goes down the stairs, screaming bloody murder. She looks up, and there is fucking Mike in the corner. And then she screams, and then boom, she's gone. That scene haunted me for days. That Mike in the corner.
Mike in the corners
might be one of the scariest moments I've ever witnessed in a theater watching a horror film.
Yeah, the image of just him standing in that corner, and I knew at the time, I remembered the story. Like some people in the theater might have forgotten it, but I remembered the story. And I just, that image is still to this day, it's triggering. You know what I mean? You're just like, not fun to look at, not fun to think about that.
So haunting too. And because he's just standing, Mike was wearing the hat the whole time.
Yeah.
So
his head's low, sullen. He knows what's coming.
Arms are down. I mean, it's just so freaky.
Yeah.
She sees him and he's standing in the corner. And I was with you. I remembered it from the story early on in the film. And I was like, oh no. And then she goes down. And again, it struck me afterwards. I mean, I've known this for years, but like it just again struck me afterwards watching it this time. We never see anything. We don't know what entity is out there, what's doing this to them. But that shot of Mike in the corner, I'm not saying it's the freakiest scene I've ever seen in a film, because I'd really have to delve into my really, disturbed mind to find which scene really freaked me out the most. But top 10, 100, it's top 10.
It's definitely a top 10.
That scene is just, and also the other thing I want to mention, we haven't even talked about this with the film. There's no score. It's just them. So that, while score, we talked about this when we reviewed the Insidious movies. Insidious is a movie, and again, totally different genre, but Insidious does a really good job of using music to heighten scenes and to really amp up the jump scares. Like when you see something, they blah with the big orchestra, and it freaks you out because it's so loud and blaring and all that kind of stuff. There's no music in this, so you're just hearing Heather screaming, her running through the house. She goes downstairs, she turns the corner, the camera's on Mike in the corner, screaming, and then done. Camera falls over, fade to black. That was a stroke of genius. And you mentioned it earlier. They filmed, I think it was 4 alternate endings trying to come up with something a little different or what they considered to be better. None of it worked. And I'm so glad you didn't do that, because this was the perfect ending.
Sometimes that happens, man. You think, oh, this is all wrong. And then you go and try to shoot it the way you think is right. You're like, the first way was the right way all along.
Listen, dude, I love slashers. I'm not saying I believe in any of it, it really happens. But if I'm in you send a fake Jason after me, I might gear up and fight Jason. I might lose, but I'm ready to go. Freddy, Nightmare is a little bit more real, but still scary. But again, it's a corporal thing. Michael Myers, all those kind of things. If I ever walk into my house and someone's standing in the corner like that, I'm gonna freak the fuck out. Is what I'm saying. I will run. I will 100% run.
Just now, I know how to scare you when I come visit you in Columbus.
Oh, you don't know. I'm gonna reach out to your wife one day and tell her to have one of your sons just stand in the corner and come in the house one night. You'll be like,
Damon, that already happens here. Sorry, that shit just already goes down.
Dude, that would tell me you come home one night, you flip on the lights, or the lights don't flip on, and you just see your kid stand in the corner. You would be like, "All right, I'm leaving. Like, I love
Knock that shit off.
I love you guys, but not that much. I'm out of here."
Gotta go.
Dude, so crazy. All right, can you intro our next category, because it was your idea, and I love this category.
Damon, I think we just talked about this category, and it's called Fuck That, which is just, this movie has so many moments where I would just be like, fuck that. Like, part of me thinks like, yeah, Josh just was like, fuck this, and walked away because of what was happening in front of them. So much. By the way, just how about this? Oh, I kicked the map into the river. Fuck that. I will go find my own way home. Fuck you both. Like, there are plenty of moments in this movie that just make you say, fuck that, I'm out. And you described a ton of it right there just now. But to me, and the house is a big fuck that. But if I'm in that house, which I've spent my fair share of time in abandoned houses. The neighborhood I grew up in had lots of them. If I hear anybody's voice coming from the basement, fuck that. I'm fucking out of there. There's no chance I'm sticking around. I don't care that it's the first sign of civilization that I've seen in 8 days. I don't care that it's Josh, who I've been looking for. Fuck that. You get the fuck out of there right away.
What I appreciate about this category, what I appreciate about this movie is because, like, they don't, like, there's one thing that we knock up against a lot in found footage movies, and you talked about this, is like, why do you keep recording? Because, like, you know, if you're in a harrowing, terrifying situation, why would you actually keep recording? And they do a good job of why they do it in this film. You know what I mean? Like, you actually believe why they're doing it. The other thing being is like, why are you still there? Like, why, you know, and not everything is them being lost in the woods, but like, why would you, like, if you're experiencing, like, now, one of the nice twists, sorry for a spoiler for Paranormal Activity, one of the nice twists about that movie was the entity was following the person, not the house.
Right.
But we've talked about this. I always say, like, the one genre of horror film I would always survive would be haunted houses, because I would just get out. Like, I'm not hanging around. I don't care. When I see blood in the toilet bowl and the house tells me to get out, I'm walking the fuck out the door. What Blair Witch Project does so effectively is you're lost. You can't get out. Like,
there's nowhere to go. You don't know where to go.
And when they do the circle and they end up back at the same creek, and they're defeated at this point. Like, they've walked for days and they're back at the same point. Like, they're stuck in some eternal loop. That would be like, I'm broken. You know what I mean? Like, I'm done. Like, just cast me in the river and I'll just wake up where I wake up. Like, that breaks you. So when you say fuck that, like, I say fuck that in the sense of, like, I would just not stop walking. Like, I would just keep walking until I hit pavement. The moment for me, so the crackling in the woods is kind of freaky. The children's sound in the woods is pretty freaky. And even that, I'd be like, no, not really wanting to be here. But again, you're lost, so you're kind of stuck. The one that got me, though, is if I'm sleeping and someone starts fucking with the tent. Here's the thing about that, Patrick. The noises could be anything. As I said, you're in the woods. Weird noises do happen in the woods. You better be prepared to put on your AirPods or something when you're in the woods, or otherwise you're not going to sleep, because there's weird noises all the time in the woods.
All night long.
But when someone messes with your tent, they actually shake you in your tent. That's something. That's a thing. That's not a noise. That's not like, was it 100 yards away? Was it 10 feet away? Was it a person? Was it an animal? Was it a squirrel? No, that's someone literally shaking your tent. Fuck that. That is the moment. Also, I was thinking about this last night, and again, this is in hindsight being 2020. You're documentarians going out in the woods. But my first thought was like, I ain't going nowhere that deep in the woods without a shotgun in my back pocket, in my backpack, and a handgun in my pocket, because I'm not dumb. I've seen Wrong Turn in other movies and Deliverance. I ain't going nowhere near the woods without weaponry. Now, I'm not saying a shotgun would do very well against a supernatural entity like the Blair Witch. But if something starts shaking my tent, I'm putting 2 barrels and a hole through it. And if they survive it, then I really know that I'm screwed. But I'm grabbing the shotgun at that moment and blasting through that tent, because that's the moment that makes me go, fuck that.
I would have fight and flight in that moment, right? Let's assume I'm just like these campers and I didn't have a gun on me. I just start punching that fucking tent right wherever the scratches come from. I start punching, and then I'm going to run the fuck into the darkness, probably until I stumble and fall and crack my head open and die.
Yeah, but that was like one of my first thoughts last night. I was like, how are you going to go in the woods without some sort of weapon? Like, dude, like I understand. I mean, they're teenagers, supposedly teenagers in college or like early 20s. Probably didn't really think about that, but that was like my first thought. I was like, I would 100% have a shotgun with me if I'm going in the middle of the woods like this, because no, no, no.
Oh my, fuck that.
All right, let's talk about remake, sequel, or leave it alone. This is a category, Patrick, we talk about an all-time film like this, or any film we're reviewing, really, and we basically theorize, should they remake it, should they give it a sequel, or should they just leave it alone? Now, to be fair, they did make a couple of sequels, very forgettable sequels, that the original filmmakers, outside of an executive producer credit, were really not involved with. There was Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows, which is, I saw it in the theater. It was god awful. I think I've seen it once. I saw it in the theater, and I was like, this is a piece of shit.
Not even Fairuza Balk could get me to that movie.
And then they did a new movie in like 2016 called just The Blair Witch, which I never saw. But I never really had a desire to see because I
saw pieces of it. It was on TV, and I'm watching. I'm going, are they doing the Blair Witch over? Like I could. They were in the house, and I was like, oh no! Like it really doesn't work for me. But that's also an unfair assessment because you know how I feel about found footage anyway. So it was just like a newer version of the Blair Witch, which I didn't need.
Yeah. So there are already sequels out there, but we're going to answer the question: remake, sequel, leave it alone. What are you doing with the Blair Witch Project, Patrick?
Oh, I mean, you remake it at $100 million with Michael Bay. I mean, you go all out. No, Damon, this one's an open and shut case. You leave this alone. It's a piece of film history, actually. It really is. It's something. It's like, are you going to remake James Cameron's Titanic? Not that I like love that movie or anything, but why bother at that point? You know, why bother even trying that? Like, we did the thing. And every found footage movie since then has essentially been a remake of it. They're trying to capture that some way, somehow, and they can't. It is the untouchable. It is lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, the real answer is leave it alone, because you're never going to have another film like this. And this film is what it is because of when and how it happened. It was released in 1990. All the things we said, the internet, the age of information wasn't what it was today, where you actually could be convinced that this may be real and these people actually might be dead. And all that can never happen today. You know what I mean? Like the real viral marketing that made this film so visceral could never happen again. So that's one. And that experience, and I'm just being honest, like I'm not saying, like, if you've never seen the Blair Witch Project and you watch it today, can it still be scary? Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you and I were growing up as teenagers watching this, it felt real. Like it just felt so real at the time. You can't replicate that in 2023. So that's easy. Now I think I read the plot of the 2016 Blair Witch, and I think what I'm about to say was part of the plot. Maybe it's bleeding into my brain. The only way they could have ever done a sequel to this film, after the fact, knowing that like people figured out it's not real, these are, this was all scripted, we're not trying to sell it like it was a real thing, which again, brilliant marketing, worked perfectly. The only thing they could have done is if they did a sequel where it was people going to look for Heather, Josh, and Mike in the woods, and then weird shit happens to them too. Somehow they get cut off from the world. Maybe they go better prepared. And, we're not trying to sell it as real. We know it's all filmed and whatever. And, inevitably we know bad shit's going to happen to them. But there's a world where I could see that film being made. And if you actually get Mike, Josh, or Heather back to make some sort of an appearance, whether it's dead body or haunting them in the woods or whatever it is, that may have been able to work. Like that would be the one story that they could have carried on. I think the 2016 may have had something. Maybe that's bleeding into my brain, that plot. Like one of the people in the 2016 was looking for Heather or something. I think that was actually part of that. I never saw the movie, but I remember reading about it. But if you make a real serious one, like this came out in 1999, they're saying the film takes place in 1994 and it was found a year later. Then if you make a film that's set in 1996, same technological disadvantages at that time. You don't have cell phones, you don't have, GPS, all these things, like, because a modern version of this film would never work. You know what I mean?
The modern version didn't work because I was
Yeah.
watching it and I was like, this is not working.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Like, you can't make this film in 2023 and have them at the same disadvantages they were in 1999, or the film taking place in 1994. So that's the only way I would say a sequel could have happened. If you did that version, I know it's a very like, oh yeah, I see that coming. But that's one story you could have potentially carried on with, where you do the look. And again, that's very typical. Everyone listening's probably like, oh yeah, that's very stereotypical. But you could have done that if you did it in the right way and you had the same people involved. None of the original people were ever involved with the sequel, so they were all terrible. That's it. That's the only one I'd ever wanted to have seen. That's it. That time has passed. You know what I mean?
Oh, that time is long gone. You ain't doing it.
If it came out in 1999, if you do this in 2003, maybe I'd be into it. You know what I mean? But it's gone. So the answer is leave it alone. This is, as you said so eloquently, this is lightning in a bottle. You can never capture this again. You can never capture this moment again. And please, for the love of God, don't ever try to remake it. Like, don't. Because
you can't remake this.
Can't remake this.
You can't. And more importantly, just not even just that you can't because the cat's out of the bag. Like we've done it. You can't do the trick again. The intentionality behind the filmmaking, I'm going to say it again, is really unmatched in found footage. It just is. Found footage is just chasing that high, but it's not that high. It's like somebody found the one mushroom. There's one mushroom that literally levitates you and sends you to space. And then after that, everybody's just trying to synthesize the situation, and it's all, it's all hallucination, and you don't actually float to space. That's what the Blair Witch is. It's that one special magic mushroom, and everything after that is an imitation. And you can't. There's no point. There's no point, because everything from that point on doesn't have the intentionality. It doesn't have it because Daniel and Eduardo didn't know that they were making a genre. They said if they'd have seen Cannibal Holocaust, they wouldn't have even made Blair Witch. They'd have done something else, because that was like their idea. They thought they'd come up with this idea all by themselves. They had no idea. So yeah, there's no way.
Can I ask real quick? This is off topic, but I want to throw this out there because I'm saying where does this rank? I'm not saying like you actually have to give me a ranking, but like when I say where does this rank, but like how high up on your list does this rank of like first time viewing films? And what I mean by that is the impact this film had on you. Like, to me, you could never see the Blair Witch a second time and it would have, like, I still love it. I've seen it 1,000 times. But the impact it had on me that first time when I saw it in the theater, no idea what I was watching, never seen anything like it before. Small part of me thinking maybe this is real. The ending in the corner, all that kind of stuff, everything that freaked me out and scared the piss out of me when I was a teenager. You're always going to chase that high. You're never going to have it again. To me, this film ranks super high on that like first time view, because I'll be honest, you're going to be like, your jaw's about to drop to the floor. The first time I saw the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I liked it, but I was like, I don't get why this is like an iconic, amazing horror film. Rewatching, I said this on last week's episode, like I need to rewatch a film a few times to really truly appreciate it. I've said that about a lot of movies. The more I watch it, the more I love it. This is kind of on the opposite end, where you can never duplicate exactly that same feeling of a first watch. Blair Witch Project has got to be near the top of that. Now, again, there's a rewatchability in this movie. I just watched it again. I still loved it. But the shock and awe of that first viewing, I'm not like saying put a number on it, but like, would I imagine this, for me, it ranks near the top. Would I imagine it's similar to you, like first time viewing, to have that kind of impact? Because even some of my favorite horror films of all time, The Devil's Rejects, which may be number one for me all time, I loved it the first time I saw it, but I learned to really appreciate it on viewings 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. You know what I mean? Like I fell more and more in love with it. I don't know how many films I could say the first viewing hit me harder with a sledgehammer than Blair Witch did.
I would say it ranks incredibly high for me. And the interesting thing is, like, keep in mind, I'm the guy who doesn't want to know anything. I knew too much going into the Blair Witch, and that was before I had made that edict with myself that I didn't want to know stuff. Imagine if I had gone in dead cold. Be like, Blair, what is that? Blair Witch. I don't know. Let's go check it out. And then I would have sat there and saw that. I might have had a heart attack and died at 18 years old. Like as how insane that movie was, because of its attention to detail and its necessity to feel real would have shook me to my absolute core. I sat there watching it in my mind, deciding this is absolutely not real footage, but boy, is it convincing. But boy, are the performances like absolutely unsettling. Like it did something to me, even knowing what I knew and even feeling how I felt and as skeptical as I was. This movie was 100% one of those movies that, like, the first impact was absolutely one of the hardest that's ever hit me.
And also, to be clear about the rewatchability, a little inside baseball, you watched it the night before I did. I watched it last night. You watched it the night before. You were actually, I rarely get texts from you saying, this movie's freaking me the fuck out. You were texting me during Blair Witch, like, I am so not happy my house is dark right now. Like, I was like, I wanted to, like, screenshot those and be like, oh my God, Patrick was scared? That's so
what are you talking about, Damon?
happens. Like, I was just like, holy shit, this actually freaked you out.
That never happened, Damon. What are you talking about?
It's just amazing, though, because, like I said, like, even the scariest films that you and I adore, we still are kind of like joking or like, oh man, like that was like, or we judge by your wife and my girlfriend, like we judge by their reaction. We were both freaked out by this.
That movie fucking hits, man. And I think it has so much to do with how it was crafted. I really do. I give a lot of credit to the filmmakers and actors for creating what they created.
Let's talk about, can we survive this horror film? One of my favorite categories on the show, and this is where we inject ourselves into whatever horror film we're reviewing, and we basically just follow the premise. Could you and I survive this film? So, Patrick, could you and I survive the Blair Witch Project?
Fuck no, Damon. for first and foremost, you've got to camp more than a night. I'm out. I can't survive. I'm gonna die having to just sleep in a tent for more than 2 days. Like, it's just not happening. That alone. Secondly, would be part of my fuck that. The fuck that idea, which is like, I'm absolutely done. And I absolutely do not want to confront what is about to happen. I will just run into the darkness. And that is where I will trip over a rock and split my head open and die. There's no way. I can't, I just, you could configure this movie any way you want. And I die. Like 100%.
Yeah. 100% I'm dead. Lost in the Woods, you pretty much screwed anybody going into this film, because
that's already bad news.
Yeah, you're already pretty much done at that point. But even like my normal, like my haunted house thing, where I'm just like, I'm out. Well, guess what? You're lost in the woods. You're never really out. Like, that's,
yeah. There's no place to walk out of. I know you're not walking into that house.
Like when you hear the children in the middle of the woods, in the middle of the night, someone messing with your tent. Yeah, when I say I'm out and I say fuck that, yeah, but where am I going?
I'm out of this ethereal plane.
Yeah, you can't get out. Like, that's the thing. You're stuck there. And, like, there were so many moments. My girlfriend was laughing because she's like, there were moments where, like, Mike was flipping out. She's like, that's so you. And when Josh was, like, pissed off, she's like, that's so you. That would be me. I would be the one losing my shit and doing that. But, like, I still have no way out. Like, listen, I talk about, like, I like going camping. Listen, I like going camping, but I'm not Bear fucking Grylls, okay? I'm not like some outdoor woodsman where, like, I'm like this, extreme outdoorsman, okay? I like camping. I'm not that. So, like, I could survive, but, like, only so far. You know what I mean? And even
Damon, 7 hours into camping, I would be drinking my own piss for survival.
Patrick, we got bottled water over here. We can't.
That doesn't matter. We're all gonna die.
Yeah. Even though I have like a little bit more than that, I still ain't that much. Like I said, I'm not Bear Grylls. So yeah, no, I'm not surviving this. I would just my one caveat to the whole I'm dead here thing is I feel like I would probably be Josh. I'd be the first one to go because I would probably be the one that would just be like, I'm out of here. I'm walking in the middle of the woods. Whatever's going to get me is going to get me, and it would get me. What I wouldn't do, however, is, as I said, if I hear Patrick screaming in the distance from an abandoned-ass house, Patrick, love you. Not coming to find you. That's the only, like, would I survive this horror film thing I'll put in, like, quotes. The only thing I would survive is that moment. I would not go anywhere near that house. I don't care if you're screaming. I don't care if they show me you in the window and, like, come get him. I'm like, you know what? I'm good. I'll find a new friend, a new podcast. I ain't going. So that's the only could I survive this horror film is what I would not go in that house. That's the one thing I can guarantee. I am going nowhere near that place.
Yeah, I'd like to believe I wouldn't go in there, but I was one of those fuckers. I used to go into fucking abandoned houses all the damn time.
Yeah.
I probably would have gone in, but the minute I heard a voice, I'd have been right the fuck out of there.
Yeah, no, I'm going nowhere near. That's the only thing I can say I would survive. You would drag me into that house because I am not going near it. Nothing. You give it $1 million and like I don't even want to like speculate on like you could not get me in there. I just know better. I've watched enough horror films to know better than to go into abandoned houses.
I want a TV show where all it is you standing in the dark in front of an abandoned house and someone dragging you in, kicking and screaming. I don't care if it's a 20-minute, 5 minutes. I just every night, every Wednesday, I'm gonna tune in to see.
Oh my God, yeah, that's like the one thing you're not. Like I said, I'm not surviving. I'm dead. I'm 100% gone. I'm Josh. I'm the first one dead. But you ain't getting me in that house. That's all I'm saying. So, Patrick, we've sold this so well. We already know the answer to this category, but I'm gonna say it anyways. At the end of the day, our final category, brought to you by our friends at Mammoth Headwear. Is it scary? So, Patrick, the Blair Witch Project, is it scary?
Damon, this is going to shock you because my answer is no, it's not scary. Is what a liar would say. Okay? No, this is a fucking terrifying movie. It's really scary. It really is. And it's for something that you mentioned earlier. And it's something that really hit me when I was watching it the 2 nights ago before we recorded this. I'm sitting in my house. It's completely dark. No one's here. Like the kids, my wife, they're gone. They're out of town. So I'm sitting here in the dark watching this movie. And it hits me that I don't know what is after these people. You know, when I was a kid, I was like, oh, it's the Blair Witch. It's the Blair. I'd never seen evidence of a fucking witch. It could be some fucking hill people. It could be something else. I never know what it is. So when the movie is done and I'm sitting in my house, it could be in there because I don't know what it is. I don't know what tortured these people to the brink and killed them in that house. I don't know what it was. So why can't it be here? You know, it's just like saying, Damon, there's this new incredibly deadly disease out there. Oh, really, Patrick? What are the symptoms? There are none. Well, guess what? I have no symptoms. Like it's you will live in a state of paranoia because you don't actually know what's coming for you. So I was scared of the dark in my own house because I'm like, well, I don't know what to fear. I know Leatherface isn't going to come get me, but I'm scared of Leatherface, by the way, truth be told. But like, I know he's not in my house. I know Freddy Krueger's not real, and I know Jason's not real. I know that, like, you know, Reagan from The Exorcist isn't real. I don't know what tortured and killed those people in the woods. No idea. It could be anything. And when the brilliance, and I'm sure this was the filmmaker's intention, was your mind will come up with something so much more terrifying. We don't need to show you what it is. That's it. That's the golden rule, Damon. Your mind will fill in the blanks, and that makes it actually a million times scarier. Remember Jeepers Creepers? Scary movie until you see the thing. And then you're like, that's some giant moth guy. Like, okay, he's never coming for me. Yeah. I'm done being scared. But I don't know what went after them. Yes, some people go, well, it was definitely the Blair Witch. Even the filmmakers will just say that. Okay, but I don't know what the Blair Witch looks like, how the Blair Witch behaves, nothing. So I can always be scared of the Blair Witch because she could be anything.
I read some criticism online. The little bit of criticism that was about this movie was that, like, you never know what it is, and like they're like, you know, the ending is somewhat like left up to interpretation what actually happened, and I would argue that to me is what makes it scary.
Mm-hmm. Because
you heard the story early on that it was a child killer who used to put kids in the corner and kill the other one and then kill them, but then you find him in the corner. So you, in that moment, you're like, oh shit, what is it?
Yeah.
Like you said, that makes it to me 100 times scarier. Because rewatching it, as I said, and we've already stated on the podcast, we don't know what it is.
Don't know.
What's rattling the tent? What's the noise out in the middle of the woods? What took Josh? What's in the house? We never see it, so it's that much scarier. Now, again, there's a million versions of different kinds of films like this where it doesn't work, and we've seen people fail at it. But this, to me, is like the greatest success of all time of heard but not seen. You know, we never know for sure what it is, but it's terrifying. So to answer the question, is it scary? No, it's not scary, Patrick. It's fucking terrifying.
It's so terrifying. It could be anything.
This is one of the scariest movies I've ever witnessed, and I think I'd have to really dig into like the depths of my brain because I've seen a lot of horror films in the theater. This might be the top for like scaring me in the theater. Like in the moment I saw it the first time, it scared the living hell out of me.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are other examples of really good ones. I'm not going to make a list right now, but I know there were other ones where it like legitimately got me in the theater. This might be number one though. I've never gotten to a point where I'm watching a film with like one hand over, like kind of peeking out of my eye because it scared me so bad. Blair Witch Project did. This film is brilliant. It can really never be duplicated. I know you said like, you know, credit to Cannibal Holocaust and things like that, but this is the movie. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to discredit Cannibal Holocaust and Last Broadcast and films that have similar ideas. The Blair Witch Project changed horror forever. And it is legitimately terrifying.
Scary as they come. It really is. It's a very, very scary. Probably, I don't know if I can call it the scariest movie I've ever seen, but I can't think of another movie that makes me go, I'm not going into that room without turning the light on, and I'm not even excited about turning the light on. Yeah. Actually, I mean, I will think about The Dark and the Wicked the first time I watched it, it kind of made me feel that way. I was like, I don't feel safe in the dark or in the light. Like that was kind of how I felt with Dark and the Wicked. But this was different. The screaming, the terror, the realist, you know, the Dark and the Wicked was clearly a movie. Like they're not trying to portray it as anything other than a dramatic horror film. I saw real fear, real pain, real terror in something that I knew was fake. That's impressive. It's incredibly impressive.
They pulled off a feat with this movie. And that's why we say, in all honesty, like never remake this, never sequelize it, because you can never do it again. They created magic with this movie, and it's remarkable. And last thing I want to say about this, and I want to give credit, you know, they eventually, like the budget, when you see budgets for this movie, you see it eventually got up like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that was all marketing. They spent like $35,000 to
60.
Well, it was 60 with post production. 35,000 is what they had to make it, and the other money was done in post production. But like $35,000, what they had to make this movie. I love that because the one thing necessity creates creativity sometimes. You know, you look at Kevin Smith making Clerks for $28,000 back in the day. He didn't have money for effects. He didn't have money for great actors. But he also made one of the great maverick independent films of all time for $28,000, and it still. I just watched Clerks last week, and I'm a big Kevin Smith fan, but that film still holds up, cracks me up. It's brilliant, and it's the most basic of films. The Blair Witch Project very much like that. So I guess what I'm getting at is, and I don't want to turn this into like a big rah-rah speech for filmmakers, but don't ever let the limitations of your budget stop you from making something creative and getting out there and creating. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, okay. If you're writing the next Superman movie, you're probably writing yourself into a corner where you're probably not going to get to make that movie, right? But if you can be creative like, you know, Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez and come up with an idea that can allow you to show your creative abilities and not have to spend, you know, $200 million, the Blair Witch Project should serve as the perfect example that it can be done. Now, will you make it as good as the Blair Witch Project? Will you make it as good? It's hard to say you will, but this film should inspire you to try. And that's what this film inspired me. It still inspires me to this day, because anytime I'm writing on a script, I'm working on a screenplay in my own free time, and I'm thinking, man, this would never work. Like, if I'm writing it, like, this would never work, because you should never write a script thinking about budget. You should write your script and then, attack it however you want. But if you're being honest with yourself, say, okay, I got this amount of money, or I'm going to film on iPhones. You can film it on iPhone nowadays. They're real good. Steven Soderbergh made a film with iPhones. This film should serve as a great inspiration to any amateur filmmaker out there interested. Not saying you have to make a found footage film. I'm saying use this as inspiration to know that you don't need to be Steven Spielberg. You don't need to have $200 million or $500 million. I mean, look, The Flash had like $200 million, and the effects in that movie suck balls, okay? You can have all the money in the world, and it can still look like shit. Don't let the limitations of a budget or cameras or great sound, don't let that affect you from trying to be a creator, is what I'm getting at. And I think the Blair Witch Project is a great example and should serve to this day as inspiration for creators out there.
I mean, I think it's a gold standard for creators, and it launched an entire genre, and it launched at this point probably hundreds, if not thousands, of careers, because they went, well, the Blair Witch made something on super low budget that is supposed to look real, so it doesn't have to look perfect. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to make my thing based on that format, because that's what I have to work with. I got a video camera, and I got a scary story I want to tell. I don't have anything else, so I'm going to make do with that. And it's launched a lot of careers. Some of those careers I really enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. That is our show for this week. If you haven't seen it, I don't know why you're this deep in the podcast without ever having seen the Blair Witch Project, but
you love the sound of our voices, clearly.
Go watch the Blair Witch Project. It's a brilliant film. It's, again, you and I are not big found footage guys, and this is a film I'll recommend, every day of the week and twice on Sunday. So go check it out. Right now, I believe it's available for free on, I believe, Freevee through Amazon. You can watch it with ads.
I watched it on Roku myself.
Yeah, so you can watch it with ads. I don't think it's streaming anywhere without ads, but you can find it with ads right now. And then I think going into this, I thought I owned the Blu-ray because I've seen this so many times. I actually only owned the DVD. So I bought the Blu-ray on Amazon the other night for $8. So
there it is.
It's not
physical media lives.
You can buy it for like $8 or rent it for like $4. It's totally worth the money. All right, folks, that's our show for this week. We'll be back next week with another edition of the show. Make sure you check us out on all of your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and of course, please go like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, hit us up on any of our social media channels. You can just find us by searching Rewind of the Living Dead on Facebook, on Twitter, or X, or whatever the fuck Elon's calling it these days, and Instagram. Send us messages, and you can also send us an email at rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. And you can also find us on our own personal social media channels. You can find me on both Instagram and Twitter at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick. The Blair Witch took my mic over.
I was like, what happened? You muted me.
Now the horror really begins.
I was like, where did Patrick go? You are Director Patrick. Yeah. So follow along. Yeah. Send us questions, comments, anything you'd like to say. And we'll be back next week. Next week, we're going to be reviewing a new movie. The Last Voyage of the Demeter opens in a matter of days. So we are going to be reviewing that on next week's show. So we go back to the new films in next week. But for now, enjoy the Blair Witch Project. And we'll see you next week for another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.